Hello and welcome to today's webinar panel presented by Access Partnership and the IGDA Foundation. I'm Gideon Led, a senior advisor at Access Partnership and your moderator today. As we close out Pride Month today, we wanted to tackle some important issues that LGBTQ users, developers, and others face in the world of video games and esports. And we have a great panel assembled to offer invaluable perspective and insights from their experience and leadership in this space. First, we have Grace Collins, founder and CEO of Snowbright Studio, an LGBTQ mobile game studio based in Cleveland, Ohio, dedicated to creating unique and heartwarming experiences for people of all ages and backgrounds. Among their many accolades, Grace previously led game-based education policy at the U.S. Department of Education, managed educational technology projects at the Smithsonian Institution, and is a former computer science teacher, published author, and game developer. Next, we have Stephen Taarland, producer at Double 11 Limited, the British video game developer and publisher, founder of Rainbow Game Jam, the award-winning international game jam around the LGBTQ community and promoting diversity in the game industry, and program director at IGDA Foundation, our presenting partner today. And finally, I'm proud to introduce my Access Partnership colleague, Kaisu Karvala, who leads the firm's UK and Europe region, helping clients with policy strategies, digital transformation, global government affairs, and crisis and strategic communications. Her distinguished professional career includes stints as a senior executive at Rovio, where she led government and public affairs for the Angry Birds brand, and at Telia, the Swedish-based telecom giant, as well as a lengthy tenure as chair of GSMA Europe, the region's leading telecom group. Thank you all for taking time today, and without further ado, let's dive right in with a fairly broad question for each of you to take some time to answer using your own perspective. Video games have evolved a lot since their creation several decades ago, as has society. Has the gaming industry kept pace with societal changes, and what are some of the peaks and valleys along the way which are important to acknowledge? Grace, let's start with you.
Sure. Yeah, only the easy questions. So, I mean, the answer is yes, right? Like things have changed. Things have changed a lot. The more complicated answer is it's been uneven, right? So like as society has progressed in different ways, it's progressed at different speeds and in different branches, in different places. And I feel like that's really applicable to games as well. So when you're looking at something like how much has the Doom franchise progressed over the last 20 years, the answer is not a whole lot, right? Like you're still kind of doing the same thing that you're out there doing, and you know there's pluses and minuses to that. I think another place where I kind of noticed there hasn't been enough change is, you know, I used to walk into like Babbage's, if anybody remembers that old store, and you'd see kind of like the wall of PC games, and I didn't see myself on any of them, right? And I can walk into GameStop right now, and I still don't see myself on any of the games there, right? So like there are, particularly when there's high dollar amounts involved in the production of these different games, we're using the same sort of models, the same sort of patterns that we've been relying on for the last 20 years, which is, it makes sense from an investor standpoint, but it's disappointing from a societal standpoint. So, so if you just looked at that, maybe you might say no, but then there's the whole indie game movement, right? And there's been so much done. Like if I want to go out and find queer games, I can, right? Like, and it's not, and these aren't like abusive games. These are like honest to goodness wholesome games that are being made, and that simply wasn't possible a few decades ago. So I would also say that one other thing too is the democratization of game development, right? Before it had to be institutional based, it had to be large teams, and now I can give that ability to my students and watch them make stories that I never could, right? Where they can create themselves and create their own perspectives in that, and they can do it in an afternoon using Twine or something else like that. And it's fundamentally changed how interactive media works, whether or not some of the bigger studios recognize that so far.
Got it, thanks. Stephen, you want to chime in there?
Yeah, I very much kind of echo a lot of the feelings Grace just shared. same kind of story. Like I could walk into a store and I'll see a lot of white male people on the front of games, but agreed they're inherently not queer. I think maybe even the last 2 years is when we've had our really kind of big AAA kind of queer characters as protagonists with Ellie in The Last of Us 2. But even then, in indie games for years now, for every kind of one step we're seeing in this big AAA space, we're seeing hundreds of kind of queer stories that are significantly more progressive in the way that they tell authentic and inherently queer stories. But on top of that, by queer creators, and they're not just mouthpieces for people to tell other stories through. From a more developer space, I agree, like access to tools has inherently made it a lot easier for people to be able to share and tell their stories, which is incredible to be able to see that from an LGBTQ kind of point of view. But we're also seeing more prolific kind of queer developers starting to come through and being able to actually stand up and showcase to people coming through kind of education or whatever backgrounds they come through and say, look, there is a space for you in this industry. And for me, that's really powerful, considering where I kind of came from 7-8 years ago. I kind of didn't see that. So being able to see that now in just a few years is really important.
And Kaisu?
Yeah, well, I'm a 51-year-old lady, lesbian lady with 2 kids. So I see it a bit differently. I see that actually sort of the LGBTQ plus culture and the gaming culture, they do actually somehow overlap a bit. My background is, of course, in mobile entertainment, mobile phones, Angry Birds, I mean, Pigs and Birds, no avatars there, but great role models, even though a bit problematic relationship. But if you think about social gaming and kids, they can invent their own avatars. They can do whatever they want. They can actually create the story by themselves. It's a fantastic tool for especially younger children who don't really fit in all these boxes, and they don't have to. But if you look at like what we did, a lot of research at the Rovio time, especially the queer kids, they really actually had their own communities. They found friends, they found love, they found a lot of things. But as at the same token, however, hate, bigotry, racism, homophobia, of course, that flourishes unfortunately also in this unregulated and rather anonymous. My child is watching this, and she will be so disappointed if I can't pronounce the word right. So that comes to the social part. I think societies haven't followed up. We have regulation, which is age-related regulation, corporate regulation, or we have privacy regulation, but it's all about the age. What is appropriate age to play a game, or what you should have in that particular game. We don't have enough dialogue with schools and studios. I don't think that regulating toolboxes and thinking whether this is gambling or gaming is really the solution for non-harmful content on the game. So I do think that the gaming studios have moved forward. Even the AAA ones have some rules now. It's not just the white supremacy killing homosexuals. Unfortunately, that's still a lot of the case. But we are moving, but not fast enough. And my question, probably what I would like to have your views from the other side, especially you, Grace, is that is the society doing enough? And I'm not trying to take your moderator role, but that's something I see Europeans are trying to do. We're imposing regulation and a lot of other things, but there's no dialogue. I think that's the lacking part of is the dialogue.
And Grace, feel free to pick up on Kaisu's direction there. So,
I mean, the simple answer is no, right? So I wrote a policy paper for the Biden administration last fall saying that it's broader than games. It's technology and schools in general. We are sitting on a time bomb right now in terms of security and safety in schools related to ed tech. And we've got overstaffed, overworked, underemployed, or understaffed schools that can't keep up with the cybersecurity requirements that we have, let alone the privacy requirements and the safety requirements needed for students. It's something that, at least in the United States, it's going to take a lot of mobilization and a lot of effort. Otherwise, we're going to see more and more situations where students are being influenced, held virtually hostage in similar ways that we've seen other infrastructure systems attacked. So I mean, so 100%. But I think that that's a separate and distinct issue as opposed to content, right? So when we're talking about how technology, like access to technology and cybersecurity and safety and all that sort of stuff, that's one thing. We're talking about digital citizenship and how to act in online spaces. That's another thing. But when it comes to the content part, which is what people so often seem to want to come back to with games, it starts looking an awful lot like censorship, right? And that's not something that we necessarily need more of in schools. In fact, I'm a big believer that virtually any game has a place in a school. The caveat being that it needs to be with an adult, right? And it's the same argument, the same conversation that we have with books, right? Like, we can understand that almost any book can have a place in a school, but it needs to be in a library. It needs to have a librarian. It needs to have a teacher there working through those complex themes with the kids as they're doing it. And I think that that perspective is probably the biggest thing that schools are missing right now in the United States is games are seen as go off into a corner and play on your iPad, as opposed to let's talk about this, let's do this as an experience together. And we're missing that kind of adult moderation and adult voice in those conversations.
Well, and actually just kind of picking up on that, I do feel like we lose out on a lot of experiences because of censorship and that sort of thing. Maybe if we kind of zoom out and talk about, why is it important for kids to have these experiences? Like what do kids experience through video games that they're not able to experience in the real world that gives them, confidence and, authenticity and those type things? And feel free to pick up on that question, whichever of you feels.
I think you can dare to be creative. You don't have to be in front of the school class and be watched by everybody. You can actually be super creative in your own bedroom with your own mobile phone or your own laptop, and you can find a friend in States from Japan and you can actually play together. That's amazing. It's like pen paling when we were kids, but you just do it real time. But that, of course, raises issues because you have your mobile phone and your kid alone in its own their bedroom. So how do you control it? What's the responsibility of me as a parent? You can't blame school if they do something odd online. So I mean, there are great companies like the 5G streaming companies, web-based games where you actually have like a Netflix for kids type of version on games, which you can actually install to your kid's phone. But I know my kids, they would bypass it and go wherever they want. So it's not really that the adults are so good in that. But I think that also might be an issue. I actually asked my kids how they feel 16 and 19. And the 16-year-old said that sometimes a friend, they don't dare to talk because they are girls. They're super good gamers, but as with the female boys, they don't enter into the game. So how to solve that? I mean, I saw that as Rovio executive. We didn't have a lot of coders, and once we had, it wasn't easy to penetrate the male dominance in the coding sphere and gameplays. But it is changing. But I think the fun learning, the fun gaming, the collective gaming has fantastic upfronts, but it could also create a lot of problems because there's nobody who can actually control what they're doing.
I definitely kind of agree with that. I think as a young teen trying to kind of figure out my own kind of like place in this world, like you'll find things that you identify with, and games are such an easy way of being able to explore different themes. And again, some of that comes with the caveat of, does it necessarily have a safety net? I think there's always the joke about like, what was Habbo Hotel like 10 years ago kind of thing. arguably not a safe space for children, but then it was marketed as a children's game. But then there's other kind of spaces in which kids can kind of identify themselves behind an avatar and kind of figure themselves out. And I think that is where the important kind of impact of games and content kind of comes from. But again, that kind of comes with the privacy side of that. Like, even if, just kind of thinking back to like when I was that age, like the thought of being able to try to articulate myself in a way that I was trying to figure out coming out as like gay and stuff like that, being able to do that through a game, but my parents being able to see that is something I never could have engaged with, at least at the time. And I think that's kind of, it's always going to be this kind of like weird balance of like, how do you establish some personal privacy, but also ensure that these kind of spaces are necessarily safe.
Reese, did you have anything to add on that? I know you spend a lot of time with kids as a teacher and otherwise too. So
yeah, I mean, the kind of story that I would run across when I was a teacher was, hey, mixed Collins, I don't see a lot of games that have Black queer women in them, and so I'm gonna make one, right? And just like that is amazing, and I think that is empowering, and that is the kind of authorship and character generation that it's what excites me, right? It's what makes me, when I say games, sometimes I don't immediately think AAA titles. I think about creative self-expression. I think that's super important. The other story I'll tell is that when we had the lockdown here last spring, and I was still in the classroom teaching, a lot of my LGBTQ students were nervous because they felt like they had an affinity space at school, because we had created a safe space for them, and they enjoyed like experimenting and expressing themselves and trying to find who they are, right? And doing that peer role modeling. And some of them went home to homes that were not, right? They did not accept that. And I actually ended up running one of my classes on World of Warcraft. So I said, like, why would I put you in another Zoom? Let's just meet on Warcraft instead. And we did, and it was awesome, right? Because they still had that moment where they could be somebody else, but it was okay within their family environment for them to be, you know, a buff male night elf, right? That was innocent enough, I guess, to allow them to still have some method of expression that they could participate in some method of play. So I was really actually thankful for games and the ability that afforded us during that time. It's not the same. It's not the same as having your peers with you, but it was something.
And Grace, you mentioned Babbage's and GameStop and some of those stores where, you know, we used to go in and buy games, play them at home on our own with our friends in person. But I feel like as gaming and esports has become increasingly online and social, you know, communities have formed, which have, you know, been a good thing in helping people find others like them and, you know, places where they can be their authentic self in a virtual world. But that's also, you know, led to people targeting those communities and seeking them out. You know, I think there's a lot of marginalized communities that are victimized through this, like LGBTQ is certainly one among them, and I think, you know, among the biggest targets, according to a lot of the research by the Anti-Defamation League and some others. And so, I mean, depending on what research you look at, it's anywhere from 1/3 to 3/4 of LGBTQ gamers, you know, report being harassed because of their you know, sexual or gender identity, which is, you know, abominable. Can kind of each of you speak to this? And you know, we've touched on this a little bit before, but can we dive deeper on, you know, I guess the roles of you know, the game studios and that ecosystem, civil society and government, and how those might work together better in the future? And we'll start with Kaisu. How about that?
I think it's like you said, it's really threefold. And I believe it was Grace who said that game companies have become these huge machines. I remember that it's a big entertainment house, A lot of them are publicly quoted. They have done their IPOs. They have very senior management teams. So how to keep the values actually of the creativity and the power of being creative. I think that was at least a challenge for our company, is to how to manage people without killing their creativity, because if we do that, we won't have a good game. So to have that in place, but also I think it has to be in somehow embedded in the games, and have a more holistic approach to just reducing hate and harassment online games. It shouldn't be allowed, to my mind. But then again, who defines what is? So there you should have the best practices of traditional social media. Maybe game rating systems should probably be a bit more accurate. But then the civil society and the knowledge they have on platforms, they should put that also in the digital game spaces. We talk a lot about hate speech on Facebook or Twitter. Why don't we just actually try to put it also in online gaming? I mean, what's the difference if you go moderating content? If you do block somebody like Twitter did and Facebook is doing, we are moving into a different direction in the content side. So I think government should be, or EU or US should probably be a bit more stricter into the content which is purely hatred and racial or being religious targeted. I think we talk too much about gambling versus gaming, and we don't understand the content side of gaming and the rationale, how that works.
Got it. Great. Grace or Stephen, do you want to pick up on that at all?
I kind of heavily agree. Ultimately, like, companies are trying to put a lot of tools in place to help with this. I think when we saw Nintendo release the Switch, they did that whole ad campaign kind of showing their parental controls and how that level of stuff can help kind of protect kids and help manage privacy and stuff like that, and stop kids kind of getting in the situation where they're going to hear like bullying and potential things like that. And to be honest, that was quite surprising being able to see that, because a lot of companies don't kind of engage in showing parents how to manage their tools and how they can help with this kind of stuff. You will see potentially a lot of parents just kind of, it is that example of just throw an iPad at your kid in the corner and hope that they get on with it. The companies are starting to put tools in place, and they just need to kind of, the educational gap of people trying to make sure that those tools are used is really important. Again, like, kids can potentially circumvent it, but at least that step is at least there. But I also agree massively that there should be like really clear regulation around what can and can't be done around here. We shouldn't be allowing platforms for hate speech. Again, freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom of consequences, and it doesn't mean you have to be platformed for this stuff. In games and by proxy, community spaces within games are the same. We don't have to platform this content.
Grace, anything to add there?
I don't know. There isn't an easy answer to this, obviously. Otherwise, we would have come across it. I think that from a public policy professional standpoint, my hope and a lot of my work actually is focused on trying to educate audiences, right? Educate the public and pull those levers, because then you're going to see demand for things like parental controls or pushback against certain games. There's not to get too lawyerly, but it's a struggle in the US in particular to find the legal justifications when it specifically comes to games and restrictions, because again, it is a form of media. I think the broader question that we have to ask ourselves as a society is, how do we engage with technology? And that's a much harder question, right? How do we engage with the Googles and Facebooks and everybody else's of the world, because they're the ones that if they lead or if they're regulated, that's going to follow and trickle down to the game companies, I would think, right? It's an easy thing to say, well, you did this to Facebook, now we need to apply this at a game company as well. It's a little bit cart before the horse to go the other way around, I think. And the last thing I'll say is that in a passing conversation with someone, they mentioned, like, is this a moment in time where we're going to look back on 20 years from now and say, I can't believe we let kids online. I can't believe we let kids have social media. Now that we know all of the dangers and mental wellness challenges and everything else that comes out of this, is this going to be a cigarette moment where we look back and we're like, yikes, these ads were for kids for social media, right? I think that's still an unknown to some extent. I think that, but I think it's something that we need to be mindful of for the future, to think about how are we going to envision a society and a world where our kids can grow up to be who they need to be. For me, a lot of times that just comes back to in person. I think that communities in person need to be there. Too often these digital spaces are used as proxies when kids aren't getting their needs met in other places. So if we can focus on community development, which you don't often hear a whole lot of, in-person community development, I think that'll lead the way.
No, I think that's really important, and I feel like, as companies, social media companies included, are thinking about these issues themselves and responsible innovation. I think this carries over into the gaming community, but diverse teams yield inclusive products, or at least more inclusive products. And we touched on this earlier, but I think when gaming came about, it was, as we noted, kind of created by and for straight cisgendered males, and the marketplace has certainly changed a lot during that time. But how would you all rate the progress that we've made in diverse development teams, AAA or indie or otherwise, during those several decades? Stephen, maybe I'll start with you on that.
Sure. I mean, it's obviously changing. I think it's the perception and the want to change from a lot of studios is very kind of prevalent now. It's becoming an ever kind of more obvious topic, especially like in European studios and the places that I've worked. And then part of it kind of comes from intent. A lot of studios kind of just want to keep doing what they're doing. Like, they're not trying to be malicious necessarily, but obviously that impacts what the products they're creating, and it impacts the people that they're hiring. And like, oh yeah, we want to be a diverse studio and we want to have all these diverse people, but then the media that you're showing online is your cis white team. It doesn't send the right message. But it also kind of comes with how do you kind of diversify your team without kind of getting someone in, and you have these kind of you have these barriers where they're kind of like chicken and egg kind of race kind of taking place. I think the fact that it's a more conscious kind of topic means that people are being a lot more proactive around it. And for me, that's kind of really important to see, that at least a lot of studios are starting to put good intentions in place.
Yeah, it's just not enough. Like, it's not enough. That's the end of it. It's not enough to grab a couple of people and put them in an office somewhere and trot them out for pictures, or ask them like, hey, can we do this, or is this too offensive, right? Which is so often what I see at some of the larger game companies. That's just not going to change the culture, right? Which is really what we need. And I think, again, when I start to feel cynical about this, which you can maybe tell I'm feeling a little cynical about it right now, I think about the indie scene, because I think that is enough when you have groups of people get together and say, I've never seen myself in a game. Let's make a game company, right? I mean, that's literally what we did, and we were inspired by other groups too, right? And you go out there and you say, we can't fit into that culture, so let's make an exemplar. Let's make our own culture here, and hope that helps affect and improve other places.
How do we know when it is enough? Is it one of those things like porn? Unfortunately, you kind of know it when you see it, or kind of what's the bar that we set for companies?
I think you're being a bit harsh, because you both are from the gaming community and you're young people. So I can talk as a 50+ here. I spent 20 years with the fixed line and mobile telco world with gray men. I was 31, lesbian, having a baby, and I wasn't given the birth. I mean, oh my God, how do you explain that? Go 10 years, and I joined Rovio. They're like, oh, great, which one of you did it? It's not just that it was 10 years ago, but it was also the mentality of the mobile entertainment business versus this old men golfing. I really had to start golfing to get being like credible person, which I didn't start golfing, but that was still the thing. And in some very incumbent corporations, it still is. So as somebody from that community, I felt super happy working in the gaming company. I felt that they took care of my family. They took care of everything that was linked to our family life. But you're right, Grace, in that we did put on our website that we have 33 nationalities. We might even have 1 Black people working in Espoo. Wow. But we had how many women and how many men? And that was something that was actually, my 16-year-old said that, why do you do it? I mean, that's crazy. So I think we should all hire somebody who's 16 years old and being sort of the advisor on the LGBTQ plus issues, because young people and tomorrow's adults, they really don't care. For them, it's the way it should be. It's not an issue that we should talk as a point of thing. It's an issue which is reality. We are all equal, and for them, we are all equal. It seems that we are having fantastic kids behind us, but it has been a rocky road for me as a corporate person also. So the gaming scene was fantastic, much nicer than the Telia part, even though Swedish company is not Telefonica either. So it was always good, but I was like, oh my God, this is heaven. So you might want to be a bit more positive also towards the old stakeholder communities, the investor guys who don't even understand what is a gay man. I mean, think about if your son were gay. There's a lot of people who are still on that level. So we can't either be as aggressive as we feel that we're being aggressed too. So we have to be very open-minded also, I dare to say.
I do have to add, like, depending on the experiences I've had at different studios is very much kind of like helped form my opinion of this. I've been in situations where I felt that, say, management or people within the studio have not been supportive of diversity or making sure that we have a diverse workplace, and why that is important for the products and the stuff that we do. And that creates like a difficult culture to kind of be supportive of or kind of buy into in some sense. An example now being the company that I'm at now, I feel able as a queer person to be able to challenge parts of the culture or parts of the studio and be like, look, I don't think this is good enough, and these are the reasons why I think we're potentially excluding parts of our potential kind of hiring pool, and that is received well, and being able to critique that. So I think part of it comes from culture and old guard and the people at the top of organizations also being willing to change and to be able to listen to, oh, actually, maybe I'm wrong on this. Maybe we can make change here. And it sounds, from at least my impression, that Rovio was a really good example of this. They were willing to change. They're willing to kind of embrace all of this positive kind of stuff. But I don't think that's necessarily 100% true everywhere.
No.
And yeah.
Yeah, but like I said, they are, a lot of those are listed companies. They have IR things. It's not always that easy, but you should not have that as an excuse to change or to have the best people on board and be totally inclusive.
Oh, and I should add that participants should feel free to chime in with questions in the chat box. I'm told that is live, so if not, I apologize. But there's a chat function there, and if you have questions, we'll try to get to those toward the end of the discussion. So just wanted to throw that out there as we head into the final portions here. One thing I wanted to touch on was esports, because I think as younger generations ascend, traditional sports are oftentimes being now replaced with esports. However, I feel like that replacement is not eclipsing some of the biases that have just lived in traditional sports for some time. Maybe I'll start with Grace on this, since I know you've done a lot of work in the esports space, but you know, what are some of those ways that you know, traditional biases kind of carry over, and what more should we be doing to ensure that we protect against this, especially considering it's such a vast and growing part of gaming?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm a storyteller if you can't tell, so I'll just tell a quick story. Maybe that'll answer the question for me, which is that last 2 years ago, sorry, I sometimes forget last year happened. 2 years ago, I was at ISTE, big ed tech conference, and I had a district administrator come up to me in charge of many schools or whatever, talk about esports. Oh, really cool, sounds really good. And then his next question was, so you split the kids up into boys and girls, right? I'm like, what? Like, what? Why? First of all, we're gonna need more than 2 categories, buddy. And second of all, like, what? Like, why? There's nothing about the keyboard. There's nothing about this mouse that has anything to do with your gender. But those ingrained biases just come over so much that, especially as in the U.S. for the last, I'd say, 3 years, there was a tussle between whether esports should be in high schools at the computer science, like at the CIO computer sciencey area, which makes it under the academic branch, or whether it should be in athletics because it says sports in it. And so unfortunately, that little battle, I think, has been won by athletics folks. And so it's being piped into already gender split areas. That's the only way that they understand. A lot of times they have multiple people, right? They're like, you're in charge of boys athletics, you're in charge of girls athletics. And so it's just being adopted into that culture. And the people who are then coming to it are coaches and other folks who are participating in traditional athletics. So they're bringing along with it all of that, which also means that they're bringing along some really problematic stuff related to, like, Title IX, for example, which is a U.S. law, right, that promotes diversity in sports, amongst other things, and protections for students. And you know, when you have a bunch of coaches coming from athletics over to esports saying, well, let's do esports, but hey, guess what? It shouldn't be under Title IX because we don't like Title IX, right? And so then you get the opportunity to do things like make all male teams, and not have to worry about racial representation, and not have to worry about working college students 18 hours during practices because they don't have any rights under Title IX, or other sorts of protections that are put in there. So it's bringing with it this really problematic infrastructure that it doesn't need, right? Esports doesn't need this, but that's what it's been glomming onto lately. That's
Stephen,
cynical again. I'm sorry, I'm so cynical.
So, Stephen, did you have any uplifting words to add to that as well?
I'm actually a bit mind blown because I didn't even realize, like, the extent in which this stuff was being applied. Yeah, like, that's actually quite shocking. That's all I can really add to that.
Kaisu, any insights?
Yeah, that was mind blowing. I didn't know either that it has been put into the sports section in the States. So I guess it's in Finland, it's seen a bit in like coding thing, but they still have the esports, but it's really into the nerd part. It's not like considered as the hockey players or anything like that. So, but I actually don't know whether can you have mixed gender teams in big esports things, because I'm a big fan of Sonic Fox, who is like fantastic, and I think that they do so much good for a lot of people. But so I would assume that the higher you go, you don't have gender-based teams. That's a question to Grace, because I don't know.
I mean, you should, but a lot of times you don't. And there are various reasons for that. I think the same sort of reasons why you see women and gender diverse people pushed out of STEM education, science, technology, engineering, math, right? Like, there's lack of role models, there's high toxicity, there's just multiple intangible barriers. I had a student talking to me yesterday who said, like, I'm so glad I had your course because now I'm in computer science and I'm making games. And before your course, I never felt welcome anywhere. And why would I major in something where I wouldn't have any friends or feel welcome? It's like, that's it, right? Like, if you look at these esports teams and they're not role modeling these things, and they show that it's a, you know, it's a bro club, and it's like, it's okay to be a bro, right? But like your entire industry can't be a bro club, otherwise you're not going to get anybody else who wants to be there.
It's almost like a replication of like the industry like 10, 15 years ago, like looking exactly like that kind of image, and nobody else feeling like they can break into it. It's just years behind where we're getting in terms of actual development. It's strange.
But I think it goes back also to the fact that gaming companies are still easily 80% male and 20, right? So the dominance is very clear. It really goes back to the STEM, and that's something that we have tried to do a lot in Europe, girls' code and things like that, thanks to female commissioners who have taken that as a European thing. But still, it's mostly the North European countries, Finland, Sweden, Netherlands, Denmark, that have it. If you go to Portugal, southern part of Italy, you just unfortunately don't have the girls coding. They're rather cooking.
I'll say too, just to tag on to the game companies, like I was at a AAA studio recently, and they had 2 cardboard cutouts there, and they're like, these are our players, right? And it was a 20-year-old man and a 30-year-old man. And they have an entire marketing department, right? And they're like, these are our personas, like if you're in marketing speak, right? Like, these are our personas, these are who we sell to. And when I said, hey, I'm visiting here from an all-girls school, they're like, well, I doubt anybody at your school plays our game. And they're okay with that. And it's like, that's like that's okay. Like, if you want to make a game company that's just selling to one type of person, like, that's okay. The problem that I always have, and I bring this back to, is that in the United States, there's been an explosion in esports scholarships, right? And these are tied to those marketing campaigns, right? So when you say we're going to give a scholarship for this game, you're really just saying we're going to give a scholarship for one of those 2 cardboard cutouts. And that's when it becomes a real thorny equity and civil rights issue here.
You know, I guess, you know, on that marketing issue, I actually ran across a Nielsen study that showed that LGBTQ players spend on average 8% more than their straight counterparts in spending. So, I mean, maybe the marketing department should look at that. But kind of the inverse is that the pay for professional gamers, you know, is, you know, very much the opposite and a much starker contrast. What can we say about that other than the numbers game? You know, what can we extrapolate from that, I guess? Feel free to jump in, Stephen or whomever. So.
Everybody's looking at Stephen, but he can.
Yeah. I guess, at least from my perspective, I guess it just kind of applies across everything. Like, the more, like, in terms of like as an employee, I think it's important that we're open about salaries, and that we're able to discuss that stuff and help kind of make sure that like marginalized people in our communities, in our studios, in our teams know that they're being paid fairly, or they're not. And I think that's kind of really important to do, and not allowing kind of companies to necessarily weaponize don't share your salary so that we can pay you all unfairly. I think that kind of opens up a lot of this. Yeah, that's all I think I can add on this.
Right.
Oh, no, I think I'll pass on this one.
Okay. Kaisu?
No, I agree with Stephen. I don't know. It's and I go back a bit to the fact that unfortunately these are big corporations. There's big money behind there. There has to be return of investment, and when you have soda companies like Coca-Cola or somebody else who are very well aware of the things they should do, but it's still a big marketing act behind it. So sometimes there's very little you can do unless it's a mega trend and you suddenly become interesting. So and especially for the indie scene, I don't assume that you have esports in the indie, but I might be wrong. There it could be a bit different.
Well, I guess on a more forward-thinking and uplifting note, since we're kind of drawing to a close here, you know, we touched on this, especially through Grace's work with students and others in the ecosystem. You know, what advice would you have for, you know, LGBTQ youth who are passionate about gaming and maybe sort of considering a career in this space? And maybe we'll start with Grace, since this is your area du jour.
Yeah. I mean, usually what I tell them is like, make stuff, like get out there and make stuff, because and don't put your value in someone else's hands, because too often the people that you're going to meet, they're not going to live up to your expectations, but you can, if you try.
Steven?
Yeah, very much kind of echoing the same sentiment as Grace, but like, just don't let anyone stop you. Don't let anyone tell you no. Don't let anyone tell you you don't belong in this space, because you do. And inevitably, you'll find your community, you'll find your audience, and they'll embrace you. The people who will say you no, they don't matter. Sod them. They're not important. Just do what you want to do and make the games that you want to make.
And Kaisu, based on your professional and parenting experience?
No, but I would say exactly the same thing. Craft your own avatars, do your own stories, create your own personas, be very real. Don't go to the money, be very humble to yourself, be very open and very honest to yourself, and always have this diversity and inclusion. It's not a discussion point, but it's an action point. That's what I would say to corporates. Stop talking, start acting.
Got it. Well, I think we will leave it on that collection of inspirational words. I just wanted to thank each of you for joining us today. This has been a fun and important conversation, and hopefully one that we can continue in the months and beyond. So thank you all, and I think we'll end it there.